Now we've come to the Suffolk village of Blythburgh. It's not a very good day. There's a lot of low cloud. It's fairly chilly. Luckily it's not particularly windy. Probably the biggest problem is going to be keeping warm while we're waiting for the washes to dry. But if you wait for a perfect day to paint, there will never be a perfect day. Although Jack Marriott, the English watercolour painter, used to say every day was a perfect day for painting, and we won't get this day again, so we'll make the most of it. The straightest edge and the only man-made object we can see in this view is the church, so that's important. Everything else is a little bit fuzzy, very atmospheric. It's autumn. The rich colours of autumn are just gradually starting to appear, but we can push them a bit. Although the sky appears to be a uniform grey, if you look at it long enough, there is little bits of light and graduation in it, so we can emphasise that to get a sense of distance. So let's start with the church. Very important to get the proportions correct, sort of silhouetted really against the sky. Very little in the way of detail. And then we've got these large trees here. I may be able to just indicate some of the windows when with wet in wet. Large tree there that breaks up the body of the church, comes across. Then we've got the bluey grey distance across there. The trees sort of fall down to the marsh area. When the tide is in, there's just a hint of the River Blythe, which is absolutely straight, and it's a nice little, because it's obviously water, and that makes a nice little streak of light across there. Got these warm yellows coming into here. There's this large tree here, which I'm just going to push up a little bit to break the skyline. That will help push everything back. This field drops down. There's a large yellow bush here. Lots of variations of browns and greens in here. Another tree just breaking in the middle distance, really just breaks the skyline, and there's a hint of a field there. I think, given the circumstances, that is about as much drawing as I would want to do. Very imposing church. Right, I've got the placement of the main forms, positioned it on the paper where I need it, so it's just a matter of now of painting. Now I've already primed my palette with fresh paint. I did that before I left home. When it's a bit cold and chilly, it's probably a good idea to keep everything as simple and as easy as possible and as convenient, because you don't want to be mucking about with paint tubes and paint tops, which inevitably you'll drop into the long grass when it's cold. I think on a subject like this it'll be necessary to start with the sky first. One or two little breaks in the grey cloud. This is cobalt and a little bit of light red. If I use cobalt and light red tends to granulate a little bit, but it won't granulate as much as ultramarine. And with a sky like this, we want it to keep it really sort of quite flat. Mix up a big lot and make sure you mix it quite thoroughly as well, because cobalt, it tends to be a bit of a stringy colour. Just put a little bit of raw sienna with it. So start at the top. A little bit of raw sienna now, and light red. Just where there's a little bit of light in the sky. Back to the grey. Don't underestimate how much paint you need to cover these large areas. A bit more of this very dilute raw sienna and light red, just to add a little bit of that sort of warmth in the sky. Slightly lighter, and back to the warmth colour. Go straight over the foliage, but see if you can go round the church. Although it wouldn't matter if you can't manage it, because it's quite dark against the sky. Just take up the odd little drip which might misbehave. As I say, that's going to take a while to dry. If it's granulated at all, it's the light red which has granulated that. While that's drying, we can go on and just put a little bit of colour in this bottom field. This is just a bit of raw umber. Let's just put a tiny bit of cobalt violet with it. Going to make that a little bit darker. When it's in damp conditions like this, one of the advantages is you have more time, because the paint doesn't dry out quite so quickly as it does in the summer. And then while that's drying, let's add a little bit of raw sienna. Perhaps even a tiny bit of alizarin crimson, just to jazz it up a bit. And start indicating some of these sort of nice ochre coloured marshes here. Now some raw umber again. Try and paint each area as simply and as quickly as you can, but also as carefully as you can, and then we'll just try and preserve that streak of water there. Very important to keep that edge, the back edge, straight, because it's water and it won't read like water unless it's laying flat. Now let's just drop in a little bit of dull green. Going to make this with, actually, let's make it with mainly ultramarine and raw sienna. Fairly thickish mixture because this is wet, but there's just one or two tiny little, that's a little bit too assertive, one or two tiny little bits of hedge just on the edge of this. And then some more raw sienna, we can just, and some viridian, just suggest some of this foliage at the bottom here, bottom left hand corner. The edge of the foliage is very fuzzy. You know, if I look at it, even with my eyes open, let alone squinting, it's very difficult to discern the edge against the marsh. So don't paint what you can't see, particularly in terms of edges. And we'll just keep varying the colour a little bit. We don't want too much in the way of soft edges, hard edges here, to attract the viewer's attention. Have some darker colour, burnt umber, and a little bit of viridian in places. At the edge of the field. Some burnt sienna. Make the most of any change in the colour for the autumn. Some very lightish green. Try and keep to masses rather than the detail. And then with some stiffer mixture, viridian and burnt sienna. Burnt sienna because it's a nice warm red, or warm brown I should say, just to darken the edge of that. Yes, remarkably the sky has dried. So let's try viridian and burnt sienna and raw sienna. So I need to put some burnt umber with us as well, just so we see if we can get the church tower. It's all pretty uniform colour actually, so come across there. Possibly slightly darker just here, just to give it a little bit more form. Perhaps slightly darker down there. Now I'll keep an eye on that, so that when I feel it's just going off a little bit, I can come back and drop the windows in such a way as they don't look as if they've just been sort of stuck on. Let's indicate these trees against the church. Very, again, a nice soft edge, so catch it before it dries out. Same with this, is really just a slightly darker tone, and so essentially thicker paint. So some Windsor blue, cadmium yellow and burnt sienna. Try and keep mixing different greens. But the most important thing is to get the tones right rather than be too hung up on getting the actual sort of colour of the green. Now I can detect a little bit of yellow there in one of the greens, and then I'm going to warm this one up here. Now I'm going to turn it into a darker green, which comes down again. Let's have some Windsor blue with that and raw sienna. Don't underestimate how strong the raw sienna, the Windsor blue is. And then there's this little bit of, it sort of extends over the marsh. A bit more Windsor blue and burnt sienna. Keep that edge nice and straight. It comes along here. Let's lighten that now. Just a bit of cadmium yellow, just push the change. Don't have any white holes here because there's a church behind that. It needs to look as if there's a church. I'll just dry this brush and just take that run off there. I want to maintain that edge along there. And perhaps let's just tidy that up a bit. There's a light green field here, so let's just hint at that. Put that in. And a very autumn coloured bush. So we might even be able to use a bit of light red and cadmium orange. Bit of burnt umber. Just take that off. And then it returns to a green here. Just put a little bit of raw umber with that. Keep that nice and fuzzy. Again, let's go into some Windsor blue and burnt sienna. Straight, quite thick paint this, just to pull out some of these bushes. And I think this is just going off enough, so I could just hint at the the windows. Actually might have gone off a little bit. Oh, that's far too heavy. That's it's spreading there, so it's, let's see if we can do a rescue job here now then. Go back with some paint. And really quite thick paint. Just hint at these windows. Put one there. Another one there. I'll just dab that a little bit. Just overpaint that. Didn't judge that very well. I want the windows to look as if they've got the same carrying the same attention in the picture, or demand the same attention in the pictures they do actually in reality. And you've got to really look at them before you notice them. This little buttress is a bit darker, so I don't know whether I'll be able to change that. Just a bit of texturing on that. Right, when you have trouble, go somewhere else. Let's put these bluey, we'll make those nice and blue to drive them back into the distance. And the same with the misty trees here. It's a colour which is actually quite difficult to identify what it is. But if I make it a bit blue and grey, then that will at least explain to the viewer what type of day it is, and they're in the distance as well. Just drop a tiny bit of green at the base of that. It's all running here because of the damp conditions. Let's deal with this tree here. Viridian and raw umber. Almost neat, straight out of the tube. Quite stiff mixture. Take some of it off on a bit of tissue, and then we can do a little bit of dry brush here. And then just do suggest some of the branches that to connect it. Bit of burnt sienna for this other tree over here. Make that a little bit higher so it clearly breaks the skyline. Now I'll pick out one or two of the darker trees here. There's one here. And a lot of this is actually sort of painting the negative space. So that will force these other bushes out. Same here. Burnt sienna and a bit of raw sienna, just to add a little bit of texture to this autumn coloured bush shrub here. A little bit of dark there. Now raw sienna, tiny bit of no, let's start again. Let's have some cobalt violet and raw sienna. No, sorry, raw umber. And I want to try and get the suggestion of this light track. Which runs down there, and then we'll have a little bit of dark just in here to entice the viewer. To look into that shadowy area. But also a bit of cadmium yellow. Even that's starting to run because it's so wet. Now the other thing I'm going to do is just again with that mixture, but not quite so dark. Let's just dull some of these little marsh areas down. And soften that back edge at the same time. Just try and lift that off a bit. Burnt umber, cobalt, quite dark. As it runs down there. Soften that edge. Just emphasize a little bit of variation in that. Cobalt and burnt umber. Just suggest one or two of these little branches. Going to try and soften those windows a bit. They're a bit too cold. It's surprising when everything stays moist how much you can continue to sort of muck about with it. So perhaps when conditions aren't as pleasant as you would have liked, it may be that you could take advantage of the more forgiving nature of the moist atmosphere. There's a telegraph pole which I'll just lighten up, and I've moved a little bit just to sort of give some, I don't know whether that may have been a mistake or not something I needed to do. Just warm that area up there. Darken some of these trees. Again, can take advantage of the idea that the fact that they haven't dried out, so they're still quite wet. Still not very happy with the church tower. Going to warm that up a bit. Right, just one or two other tiny little marks just to get a sense of the distance and the variation in this marsh here. Make sure that these marks are fairly small in order to indicate they're in the distance. Well, I think we'll call that completed. I think all watercolours get to a point, and I may have gone beyond that, where in fact they start to go downhill the more you add to them. Because of the damp, windless conditions, and there's very little heat in the sun, even if the sun was peeping through the clouds, that are going to dry, and unfortunately there's very little wind. Not every watercolour is going to be successful. Don't make any instant judgments about the work you've done. Wait until you've got home and it's dried out completely. It won't be the first watercolour I've had to carry back horizontally and leave to dry, so that and then make some sort of judgment about it away from the subject. You never know. You might be more pleased with it and it might be more successful than you first thought. At the moment, the anything I any assessment is sort of coloured by the conditions and the fact that my fingers are now rather cold. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed watching me paint like that, and I can recommend going out even when the conditions aren't especially favourable and promising. You never know, you may have a winner. Thanks for watching.